RSS, really simple syndication, or rich site summary, or some other explanation what it's meaning for, how to subscribe, the orange symbol with a dot and two wave, you could say, and our orange icon when you subscribe to blog posts and news articles and so on, and also how you subscribe to a podcast in your podcatcher or your podcast player app. So I will see here directly if it's on live here on Facebook Live, if it's working. And then, yes, it is working. So thanks, Facebook. It's working. So I had a great, inspiring meeting with a guy who's very good at social selling and how to become better in selling. We talked about in order to sell, you have to buy also. As a former purchaser, it's interesting to talk about this. And also talking about new media. And I take some things for granted, being podcasting since 2006 and blogging since 2002, about this RSS. The listeners don't doesn't really care about that. They only want it to show up on their smartphone and be able to listen, or on a browser, web browser, or now on intelligent speakers and so on. Back in the day, and that's where the name is coming from, it was on an iPod or an MP3 player. And you have to use cables and download things and upload things and so on. But now it's much simpler. So when I was launching now a new podcast called High Five for Hemp, Industrial Hemp, and sharing my personal journey with hemp products like hemp capsules and CBD oil, and also talking about the industry, different market potentials in the future, what's going on in different countries and areas in the world, and also a historical thing, the cultivation of hemp, that it's a natural thing that they're using, for example, for rope and for clothing, etc., and also building materials. So it's a great potentials and lots of applications. So when I launched this and starting it, rolling it out, I got help from my host here, sound host or audio host or podcast host, Captivate, because some things happened. I logged in my podcast, Apple Podcast Connect, in order to, get it distributed. When you get it through Apple Podcaster, then other podcast players out there are taking that RSS feed from Apple Podcast, because still it's the biggest one, even if I think Spotify is claiming that they are the biggest podcast player now in the world. We will see about that. And now Apple Podcast have announced it. This was in the spring, but I didn't look into that so much then. I heard about the news and I was thinking, well, what's about that? Is it any news? But now Apple have created something called Apple Podcasts for Creators. So now you don't say subscribe to my show if it's not that you want them to pay for a show, because lots of people have asked that. Okay, even in Sweden here, prenumerera, as you say in Swedish, or subscribe, is it free? Does it cost? Because often a subscription, like on Thursday I'm doing comment or analysis an article in The Economist, that's cost me about 700 Swedish crowns for 12 issues. So I want to be, if you want value my work and my analysis and my comments about it, because Economist is a great magazine, you could support my reading and my take on it by sending a donation. So that's how to subscribe. With The Economist, they have now for subscribers that you could hand out to distribute, I think it max 5 articles to friends and families and contacts, in order them to getting interesting, because it's the churn rate and to get a subscriber and get them staying. I have subscribed to The Economist over time, now and then taking a break and then starting again, and then maybe they have some perks and some special offers. But it is an investment, but it is a great value also. And also now where we have started with the articles with audio, so you could listen to an article instead of only reading it. And then you go back to the archives. And they have also started with this live streaming and webinars and so on. So that's you pay for what you get in a way, and that's the challenge for podcasters out there, indie podcasters. The famous people, so the celebrities, the people with lots of followings, they could get sponsors, partnerships, advertising, and so on. But what we do at have a passion products, we are knowledgeable what we are doing, especially interest. Isn't that worth something? And how could you then support the cause? So Apple now, because they are the big player, besides Spotify, now make it easier for you. So when I created this and launched this podcast for High Five for Hemp, they said, "Do you want to be join Apple Podcast for Creators?" And I said, "Okay, yeah." And then they said, "Okay, we will charge you $20 for this." And I was thinking, what's happening here now? So I'm all for it if I see a potential to earn money on a certain podcast. And in my case, I have so many podcasts. So maybe I will create a channel, the Tea Party Media podcast channel or network. But again, I'm realistic. Will the market want to pay for it because they think it's for free when it's so great demand and a supply of free stuff out there? So now they have started with this, and then I got me thinking that how to explain it to a layman and a person, because still it's about 50% that don't know what's a podcast. I often say internet radio or time shifted radio. You could listen to the podcast whenever you want. And that's one of the main advantages of podcasting. So I searched for this after having this discussion and this interesting meeting about how to present new media and the potential with the podcast. Because he asked how many podcasts I am involved in and so on. And right now, when I calculated when this Apple Podcasts Connect got going, so I got several emails that now you're welcome to Apple Podcasts creators and so on. So for 20 plus podcasts now, for one that I have myself, solo shows, and also co-hosts, and also clients that I have helped clients to get them going and register them on Apple Podcasts Connect, because it has been in the past a bit tricky to do that. And of course, when you know how to do it, it's easy. But when you do that, submit, and then you're validating it and review it, and for example, now when I did it, it says that I was in draft mode, and I was like, what's happening here? So then it was that I had to say how often will I publish this new podcast that haven't been before. So I got to it, okay. So I put it on a monthly basis, and that's my goal for many of my podcasts now. The ones that I am co-hosting with, I often doing on a bi-weekly, fortnightly basis, and the one solo show I will do when I have time, and it will be hopefully around once a month. So that's my plan. So this got me thinking that now Apple have changed it around a bit. So instead of subscribing, that's often a connotation that you have to pay, you should follow a podcast. So please follow Ego Netcast on your preferable Apple your podcatcher. It could be Apple Podcast, it could be Spotify, it could be Google Podcast, it could be Stitcher, it could be Overcast, it could be Pocket Cast, etc., etc. And the big thing is Apple is still the big one, and then Spotify is number two, I think, and especially by Android users. And then you have the rest so to come. And I think my guess is that when Google Podcast get their act together and it's on every Android smartphone, it will increase the consumption about it. So I searched for it on internet and found a podcast episode by Buzzcast, and that's created by the folks behind Buzzsprout. That's also a podcast host like Libsyn, Captivate, and Buzzsprout, and Blueberry, for example, the big or some of the biggest one. So they had an episode here in April 23rd, about the Apple podcast and the subscriptions, and also they talked about at the end of a show, it was around 1 hour, about Facebook and how they copycat things like Clubhouse and so on. But it's interesting how this audio content in different forms like Clubhouse, like Twitter Spaces and others is getting increased popularity, and then podcasting is steadily increasing. So, for example, if Facebook will start that you maybe have a special room like your Facebook group with listening to audio content, then more people will be introduced to podcasting. So that could be one thing. So in the title I wrote about really simple syndication or rich site summary. But again, as I said, the listeners don't really care. They only want to listen. But it is the engine and the subscription model by RSS that's behind the scene that is working. Otherwise, it's only separate audio files if you can't subscribe to podcast. But after this move in the spring, and then it got pretty complicated because lots of things they have to update and change. So around April, there, end of April, beginning May, they didn't advise you to log in because Apple got some hiccups and so on. So I was planning to launch High Five for Hemp on this symbolic day, 420, as you probably know what that's about. So that's been between pot smokers and others. As I said, for the record, I'm not using it myself, but I'm for legalizing it. Anyway, I want to start it on April 20th, but then it was that they had a big conference around that time, so they had shut down or maintenance mode. So, yeah, so I have been waiting for this now, and now it's back up. So really simple syndication or rich site summary, how you subscribe to podcast. So I will take a bit of sip of tea here. Cheers. So then I think Spotify's counterattack has now been that they have created a similar way that you could have exclusive content on their platform. In a way, it's good if you have a following there, but it's also that you're boxing yourself in. What will happen in a couple of years if this project with Apple Podcasts for Creators is not working? What will happen then? So in a way, I'm for the open system. So that's why I wrote in the title RSS, really simple syndication, and ×2 when it comes to podcast index, because it's an initiative of, I think his name Adam, is it Adam Curry? That's a long time podcasters that was starting podcasting when it was not existing almost. It was like programming in order to subscribe to it. So he has created an initiative called Podcast Index. He wants to have it independent from the big players and also have something value for value, that you could support market players and content creators and entrepreneurs in this field in order to stay ad free, and also that you could get something for your content and your creation and your work. It will be interesting how this will, and they say they have, I think it's 4 million podcasts that they have listed, but I wonder, are there so many podcasts there? Is it 1 million, 4 million, something between? And then you could also see how many active there are. So in a 30-day period or 60-day period, 90 period, maybe you have 500,000 or something like that. And for myself, I'm an example of that. Ego Netcast have been going on since 2006, but my latest episode before the one that I published the other day, episode 121, episode 120 I published in January. And then in a way I would be so-called inactive because it's 6 months there they've gone at least. So, but still it's going on, and I'm not stopping it and not giving up. But my advice as a new media advisor is probably that you do it more more frequently than that. So it's interesting to see how this is going. But you have a marketplace that want, in a way, give you opportunities to earn money, but at the same time, they also want to box you into their platform. And there you have the Anchor thing that it's now owned by Spotify, but that they got the email for contact information if something with your feed and so on. And now they don't add you to the Apple Podcasters Connect, I think. So now it's by its own. And I know that Eileen Smith that have a show on Anchor called Anchor Podcast Show or something like that. She talks about that, their reasons for that, and it's interesting to see who will take the lead here and who will win so-called the battle, because it had been by indie podcasters and others. They have asked that Anchor is a nice way to start, so-called for free, but you have to learn and read the terms of service, the fine print. Do you own the content yourself? And so on. And lots of people have started on Anchor, but then are they active after some time? But as I said, again, just do it, start something, and you follow along. And then, of course, you could reach out to me and get some advice, hopefully good ones, about how to start. And I am good at inspiring people, and individuals and organizations and businesses to start a podcast and then get going and then marketing and develop it, etc. So it's really interesting how this will play out in the future with the RSS. As again, listeners don't really care about where it's coming from as long as it's working, but it is still the engine and how you subscribe to and get notification. And now with Apple, they have done it for the so-called layman and the person that's not so used to podcasting but introduced to it. So it's easy now to follow and then to click a plus sign or a bookmark, and then it will sense if it's like a episode basis or is it like a serial. Because if it's in a serial, you don't want to start in the middle of a series like a TV show or radio show. You want to start from the beginning, when the series is starting. So that's a good thing. Otherwise, I think you could start whenever and listen whenever. As I said, time-shifted radio. Of course, it's a nice thing to start from the beginning and see the development of the podcast. So that's my adding my 2 cents to this discussion, conversation, the tech thing about RSS feed, rich site summary or really simple syndication, and how that will work in the future. And now how it's playing out with Apple, Spotify, and others that want to take a piece of the market and corner the market in a way. And then we'll see what will happen with content creators. That's undecided how you could support the content creator. Is it through donations, like here on Haps, and that I should now saying. Pro tip: so download the Haps app and get 100 coins. Subscribe to get notified and support my work with Haps, like thumbs up, high five, and giving Haps coins. I see it's 2 viewers here now, so I appreciate your viewing. And this got me going, so now I will create a podcast episode on Tea Party Media, diving into maybe even more or taking from a different angle, or maybe let it sink in and follow up with other podcasters out there that have comment on these new things. Because as I said, this is since end of April, beginning of May, so it have been around for some time. But as I said, you don't have to rush into it. You have to have a plan and think about it. And again, the challenge again is that a small percentage could have lots of sponsors and advertising and partnerships and so on, and they will probably join this Apple podcast for creators and also Spotify's version of it. But the small ones will have a challenge there if people want to pay for it in one way or another. But it will be interesting again to see how it plays out. Like myself, that have several podcasts, maybe that could create a channel. You could do a bundle, and then you recognize my work in different ways. So that could be one thing also. So I will follow this along and keep the tabs on this, how this industry is developing, and that's why one reason why I'm a member of the Podcast Academy. And I talking about that Raymond Ray that I had talked about with Clubhouse when he talked about that. And he would send an invitation, and when somebody got quicker in Sweden, in Stockholm, Johan Lange, he is going to Podcast Moment, and I asked him if he's a member of the Podcast Academy. So he would look into that and see if somebody in his team could be suitable for that. So I miss podcast conferences. We had planned a so-called unconference in Gothenburg, Sweden. Now it's like a bit more than a year ago, and then the pandemic hit. So we had to put it on hold and then cancel it, and now we'll see what will happen in the future. Still, I think it's demand for it. It's an interest to have, as Dr. PO, Dr. Per-Olof Arnes of Podgeek and the Logistics Podcast and podcast Logistics Rocks had said that it's an industry, and it could be of interest for many organization, brands and so on to be involved here. And as I said, on Tea Party Media podcast, I will continue to do episodes there with blog and my newsletter, as I call it, the BNP model. So with that said, now 4 viewers, thanks for viewing, and now I've been babbling for around 22 minutes, so I think it's time to wrap up. And on Thursday, talk about an article in The Economist, and then I will probably do that around 9 a.m. Central European time. And on Saturday, I will have a tea drinking party in the evening on Saturday around 9 p.m. Central European time. So with that, I say cheers and talk soon again. Bye for now.